Hello and welcome to the first CSW 101 from eS4W webinar on the Commission on the Status of Women. Today we have speaking Carol Shaw from JERA International, Judith van Unen from JERA International, Michelle Deschong, who is a well-known advocate and international leader, Isa Marriott from Triggered. She's the founder of Triggered, which is a new feminist network. She's also been associated with JERA International. Today we're going to be moving quite quickly through the slides in order to get through all of the information that we need to get through. Please don't worry about that. You have an opportunity to type your messages into the box at the side and we can answer them as we go along, or you will be able to get a full copy of this presentation. It's being recorded and will be available on the eS4W website. Why is it not moving forward? Oh, left click, okay. Technical difficulties over. The introduction. We're going to be going through this, as I said, fairly quickly, and there will be the opportunity to interact live on the text box, and you will be able to address any questions in the follow-up, or any questions can be sent through to Economic Security for Women, and they'll be addressed separately. This presentation is going to look at why CSW, how does it link with women's rights and your work, key treaties to know about if you're heading into CSW, representation in the global arena, some of the essentials you need to know to go into the Commission on the Status of Women. Australia's preparations and priorities are being addressed by Prue, who will be giving us a video on this. We'll have a quick chat about this year's priority and review themes, and then we'll finish with preparing language, gains and pitfalls, what you need to know around that. Okay, so why CSW? The Commission on the Status of Women is the largest and the only global women's policy space that links global agreements to local actions. It really falls into two parts. You have the women's rights. It strengthens the women's rights agenda globally, locally, regionally, nationally. And it, through the outcomes document, which is the outcome from the Commission on the Status of Women, you can use the information and the agreements within this from the national context. If you think about how the Commission on the Status of Women links with your work, you only need to look at some of the rights processes that are occurring. This year's themes, with the Commission on the Status of Women every year, we have a priority theme, a review theme, and an emerging theme. The priority themes and the review themes we'll be talking about a little bit later in the session with Isa, and the emerging theme we are not going to cover within the context of this particular webinar. The first week, CSW lasts for 2 weeks, and the first week is the high-level segment. This is when we have most of the ministers or the high-level cabinet representatives in the room. They present their documents, they present their reports on how they have achieved what they have said they will achieve in this area. And the second week is generally a negotiation week. It is unusual for high-level ministers to stay around in the second week, New York, or by the high-level representatives that are left behind from, say, the Office for Women. And we're hoping that Prue will address who will be there, as and when she knows it. It's probably not been decided yet, who will be going to the Commission on the Status of Women, and we will find that out as we move forward. The whole idea of the Commission on the Status of Women is to make the silent speak. This is to allow those who may not have a voice at the national arena because of various reasons to be able to bring their voice into a global arena. An example of this may be some of the refugee issues where refugee women do not have the opportunity to address issues within the country they are currently residing, but they can make those representations in the global arena. So there's a big difference between what you can do nationally and what you can do internationally. You also have the opportunity to impact national policy through what comes out of the outcomes document. Now, Judith will be covering the outcomes document and how to use this later on in this webinar. Before we go in, some of the treaties you need to know about for the Commission on the Status of Women are the Beijing Platform for Action and the Beijing +5 outcomes document. The Beijing Platform for Action is a document that was agreed in 1995 and still stands. We are moving towards its 25th anniversary, and it is the main reason that Commission on the Status of Women is in place. The Beijing Platform for Action is a blueprint for really putting into place the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is the CSW document, and a lot of us know about that. We've been working on it. And in more recent years, in the last 5 years, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development has also been addressed in the Commission on the Status of Women. So if you're going in, you should at least know about these 3 documents, how they are, what they do, and how they link together. And here's a small example that I pulled together. This information was provided to us from the Asia Pacific NGO Committee on the Status of Women. The Asia Pacific NGO Committee on the Status of Women works collaboratively with the New York office, but holds more regional information. I've used the information they sent us to tailor it to some of the areas that economic security for women have been looking at. So you'll see the Beijing Platform for Action has 12 critical areas. I've pulled out 3 of these: women in poverty, education and training, and women in the economy. And I've marked in there how they link with CSW. So women in poverty links directly to CSW Article 13, and with the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 1 and Goal 10. So if you're working in this area, these are the areas to start to hone your information into. We can do more on this before CSW through a teleconference with Economic Security for Women. Economic Security for Women also have a resource on their website which covers the identified economic security for women priority areas and how they link to these conventions and treaties. Okay, so on to what you really need to know before you move into the Commission on the Status of Women. In order to attend this meeting and to enter into the formal parts of the UN and the UN building itself, you will need to have a CSW pass, a Commission on the Status of Women pass. This is given by an accredited organization. So accredited organizations to the United Nations, so they are accredited through the Economic Social Council, will be allowed to give up to 20 passes per organization for each conference. For the Commission on the Status of Women, if you are a national organization, this will be spread across your national members. If you are an international organization, you will have 20 places for your international members. And so it's a real tight representative pool that can go. Each organization will have its own means to get accreditation. So with the accreditation, there are specific roles and responsibilities because you are there as a representative of that organization in a global space. And we'll talk a little bit about representation, or Michelle De Jong will be talking a little bit more about representation later. But please remember that when you are there, you are representing your organization and your organization's responsibilities. The passes to the Commission on the Status of Women will be issued over the weekend prior to and on the first and second days of the Commission. There is generally long queues, and you will have to be able to take the correct papers with you. So you'll need to have your the form that you've received back from the accredited organization plus your passport. If for some events, for some of the side events or different UN events, there are also special tickets, and you will need to check the website prior to going about these special tickets. Parallel events are events that are generally held outside of the United Nations building. They are held in 3 various sites, the Salvation Army site, the Church Center, and there is a new and a really good site which is just the other side of the, I haven't got the address of it, but it's just the other side of the
42nd Street.
of the station on 40th Street, 42nd Street. Again, information will be sent out prior to events when everyone knows which their events are. So with parallel events, anyone can apply to run a parallel event. They are held outside of the UN, so you don't necessarily need to have a CSW pass to attend them, although for some you will have to register, and if you don't have a pass, you may still have to register. Side events are generally held within the confines of the United Nations, and they are generally co-hosted by the government. Currently, the Australian government has put a call out for side events, and we'll cover that a little bit later. Training and the caucuses. So while you're at CSW, the NGO CSW committee runs various training, and there are also regional and identity-based and topical-based caucuses. Caucuses is just really another name for a meeting, and it means that there's an opportunity to come together in a global arena with people who are coming together around that particular issue or that particular identity. For the trainings are run every day in the first week, and they run in different languages, and you can find out more information on the Asia Pacific NGO CSW site or Facebook on that. The main thing that comes out of the Commission on the Status of Women are outcomes documents, and Judith will be talking about the outcomes documents at the end of this session. One thing that I will say for this is when you go to CSW, you will be there after a very long flight. You will probably be jet lagged. The weather will probably be atrocious, either heavy rain or snow. And I really do push that you have a bit of self-care into your schedule. Make sure that you're resting, that you're eating properly, that you're drinking enough, that you're taking snacks into the building with you. You're not allowed to take hot drinks into the building. There are plenty of places within the UN to get food and drinks. But please take the time out and breathe and think about things, because it can be overwhelming. Okay, I'm now going to pass over to Michelle. And Michelle, as we know, has been to CSW many times. She's very aware of the representation in the global arena and how that can impact in the national arena. So, Michelle, are you available to come in online now?
Yes, thank you for that, Carol.
Excellent. I'll pass over to you.
So thank you very much. I thought it might be useful to provide a bit of a perspective from my own experience in terms of participating at various UN forums, but I've been at both the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, CDAW, and also CSW. I think I've been to CSW about 5 times, and of those visits, I actually participated on the government delegation for one of those years. So I thought what I might do is just talk very quickly about how the kind of representation comes together. I do note that particularly some of the representation for the government delegation has been challenging over the years, and I feel that it's getting even more challenging with the refinement of eligibility criteria. And so one of the issues as an Aboriginal woman is to make sure that we continue to represent the voices of women of diversity, and that intersectionality has to play a big part in our representation from Australia into this space. Because just as Carol said in the introduction, it's the marginalisation of women in a domestic space that is absolutely important for us to recognise and to utilise that global space to have kind of influence and impact. So one of the challenges I think that's really important for people when they're attending CSW is to have a bit of time pre-departure to understand what the critical issues are, to speak with people who are working in the field all the time, particularly if this is your first opportunity, touching base, being a part of the conversations, the teleconferences, you know, working with people in the sector for a little while to get a bit of a handle on what might be the dominant themes and messages that we want to get across as part of that opportunity. Also, from an Aboriginal perspective, say that I think it's absolutely imperative that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women must have the right to build their own collective position and also be a part of that representation and delegation, not only for the government delegation, but also they must be fairly represented in the NGOs more broadly. Partly because one of the commonalities that runs through that CSW space is, again, as Carol mentioned, the opportunity to have some of the caucuses around particular themes, and having participated in the Indigenous caucus for many years, what we see is a similarity in the conversations and the key messages, and we actually can also get our own kind of mobilisation from that space. I think one of the questions I'd like to put to, or ask people to consider before they go to CSW is, what have you actually done to increase the capacity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women to be a part of this delegation? And if you haven't done anything, what might you do differently? Similarly, for all women of diversity, how are we engaging and understanding their viewpoints? I wanted to talk just briefly about some of the concerns I've had in previous years when non-Indigenous NGOs have been in this space, and they have really spoken about critical Indigenous issues and have misrepresented what that means for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. I want to give a quick example about that in saying that a few years ago, as many of you may know, the intervention that was applied to Aboriginal people living in the Northern Territory was a really distressing piece of legislation. It meant that the Racial Discrimination Act had to be lifted to enact it. It also has created a number of different challenges domestically for Indigenous people living under that regime. And we had non-Indigenous people representing in that global space basically saying the intervention was a really good thing. And this was in contradiction to the messages that Indigenous women were putting to that space, saying it was actually a violation of racial discrimination, of our Racial Discrimination Act, and a violation of our human rights in terms of our right to choice and the way in which we engage in our own business. So I think really critically thinking about who you are there with, how you represent, and what is the parameters around your own representation. And then finally, the next thing I would like to say is, please be very considerate of not taking the space of women of diversity. It's very easy for people to have access to lots of these networks and opportunities, but in that international arena, it is absolutely imperative that we must ensure that everybody gets a fair opportunity to speak and to represent, and that there are many of us who've been before and are always available either pre or during the event. We're usually on big email networks and things like that. But being very clear about what we're going there to do, having a bit of a united voice around what the commonalities and themes are, and how we are empowering the voices of those most disadvantaged, I think is the three key takeaways that I'd like to share with people.
Thank you that's great. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. Just picking up on some of those things, I think it's so important that, as Michelle said, it's great to be there for the networking, the things you can learn, but also don't forget what the opportunities are for others to speak, and for you to make sure that people do have the opportunity to speak, and also being very clear about what you're there for. We're now going to move to Prue Mooney, who is the Director of International Engagement at the Office for Women at the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. And she's going to speak to us through a video, and this is going to come on now. Whoops, no, something just went wrong. Sorry. Yeah, I'll do it. Bear with us as we just come back.
Welcome to Economic Security for Women's Commission on the Status of Women, CSW 101 webinar. I'm Prudence Mooney, Director of the International Engagement Team at the Office for Women within the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. CSW is a global policy-making body that is dedicated to advancing gender equality and the rights of women and girls across the world. Each year, representatives of the United Nations 193 member states gather at UN headquarters in New York to evaluate progress on gender equality, identify challenges, set global standards, and formulate policies to promote gender equality and women's empowerment worldwide. The 63rd session of CSW will be held from the 11th to the 22nd of March 2019. The priority theme for CSW 63 is social protection systems, access to public services and sustainable infrastructure for gender equality, and the empowerment of women and girls. The review theme is women's empowerment and the link to sustainable development. These were the agreed conclusions from CSW 60. Broadly speaking, the Australian Government has a range of priorities for the achievement of global gender equality, including the prevention and elimination of all forms of gender-based violence, including harmful traditional practices. Increasing women's economic security by accelerating women's participation in the paid workforce, enabling better access to finance, trade opportunities and information, and better digital and communications technology. Including women in leadership and decision-making roles in all areas of society, including at all levels of government, the private sector, the broader community, and in conflict and post-conflict zones. Better health and education outcomes for women and girls, with a focus on access to quality, affordable services, including in relation to women's sexual and reproductive health and rights. And recognition of the importance of working with men and boys and the role of civil society, national human rights institutions and human rights defenders as agents of change in ensuring gender equality and the protection of the human rights of women and girls. The Australian Government delegation will also continue to assess the gender goals and targets under the Sustainable Development Goals alongside the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Your engagement in forums like this and taking part in our call for submissions will inform the Australian Government's position during negotiations of the CSW 63 agreed conclusions and other related resolutions, and will also provide a focus for Australia's broader participation at CSW side events and meetings. Thank you for your attention and in advance of your future engagement.
So we thank Prue for giving us some background to the Australian Government's thinking on CSW coming forward. I'll just repeat some of the priorities that she spoke of today. The first being the elimination of violence against women and girls, economic security for women, leadership and decision making at all levels including conflict zones, health outcomes for all women and girls, including sexual and reproductive rights, working with men and boys, and working with civil society, human rights institutions and human rights defenders. So they're the 6 priorities that the Office for Women has agreed to.
I understand there was a bit of a technical difficulty with the video. We will show the video again at the end of the slide, at the end of the presentation.
Okay. So if your priority is not in those 6 looked at decided by government at this stage, does not prevent you from taking your own issue forward and working with the government delegation and with government right now to take something forward. But these are the 6 issues that the government sees as being their priority at present. Okay, so coming up, pardon me, coming up from here, there are other opportunities that any of you can engage with Office for Women. And so the best thing to do is to contact Economic Security for Women. The first of those is to invite alliances to provide input into the comprehensive national review report of the progress made and the challenges encountered in the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action. That comes up for review next year, and while the government puts something forward, it is essential that civil society also has a look at what the government has done and if there are gaps and challenges for what the government has achieved so far. Because normally the government will put forward a very confident report on the Beijing Platform for Action, which is B25, which means it's 25 years since Beijing Platform for Action was decided in Beijing in 1995 at the last World Women's Conference. So this means we really not only have to input into Office for Women about what we want to see that has been, the government has done with confidence, but also what are some of the gaps and challenges that still need to be addressed. The Office for Women is also inviting alliances to nominate non-government actors from the specific groups for inclusion in the official CSW Australian Government delegation. So this particular role is fully funded, and anyone is able to put their name forward to, for instance, economic security for women, or any one of the alliances you may be a partner of. But you must make sure that you get to them by the 4th of January is when each of the alliances must put someone forward. So you need to give them time to do the checks and balances that are required for the name to go forward. Additionally, PMC, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, is inviting coordinating organisations to put forward, on behalf of members and non-government actors, proposals to co-host side events with the Australian Government. These side events, as Carol has told you, must be hosted by the government. They hold them either internal to the UN building, or they may hold them at the mission. Australia does hold several at the mission over the period of the 2 weeks. So these are deadlines for 7th of December if you're wanting to have a side event or want economic security for women to put forward a side event. So you need to get back to eS4W. Okay. So I'm now going to hand you back to Carol.
Who is going to briefly introduce Isa Mariol, who is the founder of a new and exciting feminist website. It's just starting off. She's a former young leader from JERA International. And I'm going to hand you over to Isa now to put a few words together on the priority and secondary themes from the Commission on the Status of Women 63.
Thank you, Carol, for that lovely introduction and for inviting me here today. So I'll be running very briefly in this short video presentation through the priority themes of the CSW, and all the information in the video was drawn from the CSW expert group meeting documents. And if you have any further questions regarding the priority themes, we will answer questions through Q&A at the end. The priority theme is social protection systems and access to public services and sustainable infrastructure for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. And the review theme pertains to women's empowerment and the link to sustainable development.
So we'll go to the second video.
Hi, my name is Isa Moreau of JERA International, and today I'll be outlining the priority theme of the CSW 63. For those of you who are unclear on what the CSW is, it is a key global intergovernmental body that is exclusively devoted to furthering gender equality and empowering women. The priority theme pertaining to the 63rd session of the CSW is framed around social protection systems. In the name of austerity, many social protection measures are becoming increasingly redundant in the context of escalating corporate power, as the global elite operates seemingly unchecked and unbalanced. We are witnessing a time in which the rise of right-wing ideologies and increasing income-wealth disparities seem to marry hand in hand. Gender equality progression is facing ideological and intergovernmental roadblocks. Now, more than ever, the most vulnerable need social protection from the afflictions of rampant free market capitalism. Now, there are two very important questions I'd like to address in this presentation today. The first being, how can we define social protection systems? And the second being, why social protection systems matter for gender equality. First of all, social protection is a human right and can be defined as a set of policies and programs designed to reduce or prevent poverty, vulnerability, and social exclusion throughout the life course. And the reason why social protection is so important in matters of gender equality is because women in particular face specific gendered risks throughout their own life course. And that is why it is so important for us to begin addressing women's core burdens in lower income settings in particular. Invisible work or unpaid care work is mostly conducted by women. it is difficult for policymakers and social researchers to determine the risks associated with invisible work, as it is not conducted in formal work settings. Now, the three key focus areas of the CSW 63 include social protection, infrastructure, and public services. All of these areas must be reformed to reflect the actual realities of how women live and work. We urge states to recognize more gender-responsive spending and the coordination of these three key measures to stimulate economic recovery and social protection. Essentially, we must design social protection systems that promote more equally distributed unpaid care work amongst men and women by introducing initiatives that include paid paternity leave, for example, to encourage men to partake in child-rearing activities, or even affordable child care services. Let's start putting mechanisms in place to ensure that women are comfortable in both the formal and informal sectors, so they can be free of harassment and violence. This will undoubtedly require cross-sector cooperation in both the global north and the global south. In conclusion, it is essential that we begin reimagining the current dominant economic paradigm by introducing these protective measures, such as universal health care, and addressing unpaid care work to which women are the primary subjects. Thank you very much for listening, and have a wonderful day.
Okay. Thank you very much, Asa. We're now going to start talking about the outcomes document, which is the priority and main goal of CSW. It's an intergovernmental conference to be reminded of, because it is not something where civil society gets to act out on the floor or even make exchanges with governments on the floor. You will be outside either as observers in the room or outside the room, and that's where you may find some opportunities to engage with those member nations who are participating and presenting on the floor and negotiating during the second week. The first week is, as Carol explained to you, it's more high level. There are many presentations made, and they're worth listening to simply because you will get an indication of where governments are moving to, where they're thinking on particular issues as you listen to the panels, etc. So it's important, if you're going to engage in language, to know the direction of many of the member states, because they can be very contentious, given that there are 193 member nations who negotiate. So it has to be by consensus. Hence, it can be quite fraught at times trying to negotiate through all of that. So knowing where each government stands is worthwhile, because it's not just about those who agree, but those who disagree with the type of language or the issues that you're wanting to put forward. It's very important to make it as easy as possible when we get to doing language. The first part of the outcomes document is the preamble, and that gets to explain the direction that the agreed conclusion, this thematic issue, is moving to. And it will repeat many things that have been said before at the beginning of each of these outcome documents by supporting the Beijing Platform for Action, etc. Though there has been some move to discuss about trying to move away from the Beijing Platform for Action as a solid basis for CSW, which from women's perspective is really important that it remains as a very focal point for the outcomes of any of the issues. The operative paragraph is probably where most of your organisations will try and input. Though both can be important, but the actions are usually where most of your organisations will want to focus and put some language around. You need to be beginning now. Most of your organisations, if they're national or international, will already be discussing these matters with either government representatives, with politicians, with departments and agencies, to get an understanding of what are the particular issues or challenges that your particular issue is facing and how you'll take it forward from Australia's perspective. That is, as I said, very important that you totally understand that this is an international forum. It is absolutely crucial and essential that you understand that the language you put forward to the Australian government delegation to take forward in negotiations must be adaptable to 193 member nations. So it's important to try and remember that that's where that document is heading for, and the sort of things that the Australian government delegation will be facing when it is trying to achieve that influence in trying to change the document or some of the language that will be around that. So it is also, can we move to the next one? So it's very important, if you want to influence outcomes, you must do your research. What is your issue about? What are, as I said, where does it stand in a global context? Where does it stand in Australia? What will be pushed back by either our government or another nation? It's important to consult. I think Michelle mentioned this, how important it is to consult with others to make sure that all of your language and your discussions and your networking is inclusive of making everyone's voice be heard. So it's absolutely important to consult wherever possible, not just within your own organisation, but with other organisations. It's important to find like-minded people that find your issue as important to them and work together, because getting language in is very, very difficult. You will only get a small opportunity and it needs to be concise. So that consultation is important. It is absolutely, again, crucial and vital to listen to others that you're consulting with and to make sure it's more broad, that's inclusive of others. And as Michelle said, it's so important to include our ATSE women to make sure that their voices are heard and that they're understood and have an opportunity to input into the words and the language that will go forward. But there are many different cohorts that you need to reach out to, so you need to be listening and then share. Sharing with everyone is vitally important as well, because the more people have read it and seen it, the more likely you are to get some support on the document and also with government and the delegation. So you are not just, you have to remember you're not speaking for yourself when you go to CSW. You're speaking on behalf of the organisation that you're representing. You're speaking on behalf of all Australian women, and you're speaking globally for women who have issues the same as yours and want to be taken forward where they have no opportunity to speak. They don't have voice in their own nation, and they're relying on women who come together at CSW to help them with that voice and for it to be heard. There is there's much in the way of what they call sticky language to make sure that these are included. I'm sorry, it's pouring with rain in Melbourne, and I've managed to catch a cold on the way in. Not helpful. Sticky languages is like family versus family. The family unit is often equated to a nuclear family of mother, father and children, and generally the term family is preferred by conservative delegates over household or kinship in order to preserve patriarchal notions of what a family is, and to exclude families from household structures, including kinship groups and LGBTI. So again, it is important to look at how you're expressing that language and make it internationally inclusive. Families is using plural, is more inclusive, but recognises the diversity. Again, I think that Michelle mentioned. Sexual reproduction human rights is important to advocate for, and it's done without qualifications, meaning without calling specifically in accordance with ICCPD or BPFA, without the qualifiers, is within the broader definition of recognition of our own bodily integrity and access to services in the broader term of reproductive rights. Another one is sex work versus prostitution. Sex work is paid employment, the element of choice in choosing this voluntarily. Prostitution is a power dynamic. The person may or not be there by choice. In sale of sex is exploitive. I'm checking to see if there are any questions at this stage, but I can't see there are any.
It's Carol here, can I just add on the sexual and reproductive health issue while Judith's coughing into her handkerchief, that on the sexual and reproductive health issue, it is a priority of Australian government. It is an issue that is globally receding and going backwards, with less issues of choice, especially around reproductive rights of having children timed in the way that you wish to, or access to health services or abortions. So the idea that we don't qualify this with the ICP or BPFA means we try to get it into the operative part of the document, so that it generally, at the top part of the document, as Judith had said, the preamble, where it links the issues to those in the Beijing Platform for Action, they have qualifiers around as described in or as in accordance with. So with the sexual and reproductive health rights, it is especially at this time urgent that we don't have qualifiers around those, so that women who are in situations where they have really restrictive access to sexual and reproductive health and rights are able to use the document in a way that will allow a little bit more leeway on that.
Remembering that CSW doesn't just happen for 2 weeks every year. It happens virtually all year round because we know what the next thematic issue and review theme is going to be for the following year. So when you come back from CSW, if you're wanting then to pick up and run with those issues for your policy work and advocacy, it should be, as I said, right now is the time. You should have been talking to government, talking to departments and agencies. It's starting the conversation now with government, with other CSO, and with any other agencies or anyone who may support, both here in Australia or globally if you have global contacts. There are many experts and people who have been before, women who have been, and can be very supportive and helpful. There's always someone to reach out to and get the support you required, because at the end of the day, the reason why you are wanting to put language forward to the Australian government is for your policy work and to make a difference when you come back. That's the object of the exercise, is to try and make changes. Those issues that are important to you need to be changed, and you've got a supportive document. That document, the agreed conclusion, is also a tool for women around the world to be able to go to their governments and say, you've agreed to this. Unfortunately, it's not binding. The agreed conclusions from the Commission on the Status of Women is not binding, which is why you will see much language about in the fullness of time virtually, rather than a compelling argument for something. But you need to make it as compelling as possible. It's also important that where you possibly can, use agreed language. That means the other documents that Carol pointed out before, the Beijing Platform for Action, CEDAW, and many other conventions and treaties and agreements can be used, because it's much easier in negotiations for the Australian government delegation to be able to have that conversation. Negotiations on one sentence can go on all day, all night, and can change many times over the course of particularly the second week. So it's vitally important that you make it as easy as possible to get the outcome that you want. So as I said, where possible, look at agreed language that can take that forward and help you gain that support that you're looking for. And make sure that everyone that you meet with, both here in Australia and at CSW, know what it is you're trying to achieve, so they too can take it to their government delegations to get that support. The more the member state delegations know what is being asked for and sought, the easier it's going to be for Australia to be able to have that conversation and try and change the text, because those text changes happen rapidly in some moments and then it looks like they stand still for others. But that can change rapidly over the course of one day. So we make it as easy as possible to be able to gain the language that we want to have in there that will give us the outcomes that we're looking for. Where's it gone? Left. Okay. If you want to be able to influence the Australian government, as I said, keep it simple. We have been asked, or women of Australia have been asked to input into the Australian government delegation's position. We do this through the alliances because that's who they're currently turning to. So if you put your two sentences together, but you need to, as I said, do all your homework first and your research to make sure you want these two sentences in somehow to be inclusive. Keep it concise. Keep it as simple as possible and concise as possible, because a sentence is going to be highly contentious to try and win over, because governments will play at trade-offs and to try and gain the words they want, they will block something else until they get an agreement on theirs. So we need to make it as easy as possible and keep it as small and simple as possible. Look at your keywords and your key messages. Underline those so that the government delegation knows what it is what you're wanting to achieve. You should have a preamble to it, so you give background. That's where most of your language will go in explaining the language you want to put in. So a preamble is not too long, but certainly enough to be able to explain why it is important for this outcome to be included in the agreed conclusion. It's important then you send it off to eS4W because they will be correlating everything and sharing it with the Office for Women. So.
Okay, this is the end of the formal presentation. I'll swiftly put it onto acknowledgements. We are going to rerun the video from the Office for Women now because I understand some of you had difficulties with this. If any questions, please type them in and we'll address them after the video.
Welcome to Economic Security for Women's Commission on the Status of Women, CSW 101 webinar. I'm Prudence Mooney, Director of the International Engagement Team at the Office for Women within the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. CSW is a global policy-making body that is dedicated to advancing gender equality and the rights of women and girls across the world. Each year, representatives of the United Nations' 193 member states gather at UN headquarters in New York to evaluate progress on gender equality, identify challenges, set global standards, and formulate policies to promote gender equality and women's empowerment worldwide. The 63rd session of CSW will be held from the 11th to the 22nd of March 2019. The priority theme for CSW 63 is social protection systems, access to public services and sustainable infrastructure for gender equality, and the empowerment of women and girls. The review theme is women's empowerment and the link to sustainable development. These were the agreed conclusions from CSW 60. Broadly speaking, the Australian Government has a range of priorities for the achievement of global gender equality, including the prevention and elimination of all forms of gender-based violence, including harmful traditional practices. Increasing women's economic security by accelerating women's participation in the paid workforce, enabling better access to finance, trade opportunities and information, and better digital and communications technology. Including women in leadership and decision-making roles in all areas of society, including at all levels of government, the private sector, the broader community, and in conflict and post-conflict zones. Better health and education outcomes for women and girls, with a focus on access to quality, affordable services, including in relation to women's sexual and reproductive health and rights. And recognition of the importance of working with men and boys and the role of civil society, national human rights institutions and human rights defenders as agents of change in ensuring gender equality and the protection of the human rights of women and girls. The Australian Government delegation will also continue to assess the gender goals and targets under the Sustainable Development Goals alongside the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Your engagement in forums like this and taking part in our call for submissions will inform the Australian Government's position during negotiations of the CSW 63 agreed conclusions and other related resolutions, and will also provide a focus for Australia's broader participation at CSW side events and meetings. Thank you for your attention and in advance of your future engagement.
Okay, I hope that you all had the chance and the opportunity to review the video. I'm sorry for the technical hitch a little bit earlier. Just to reiterate and to go back to an earlier question, this webinar is being recorded, so you will have opportunity to re-see all of the slides and to hear the recording again on the Economic Security for Women site. It should be up by early next week. For those women who have difficulties hearing, we will also be providing the slides with the notes so that you will be able to get a dot point of what was said in the presentation. That will also be available by next week. There is a full transcript of the video that Isa Mario from Triggered did, and these will all be available on the Economic Securities website early next week. I'll hand you over to Judith to answer Teresa's question around how does the government delegation and self-funded Australians, I presume you mean NGOs, work together, And are there meetings with all parties before going?
Thank you very much, Carol. I'll just add, Linda, there will not only will be the webinar, recorded webinar on the eS4W site, but there will also be additional resources that you can go to learn more. There is an Australian NGO guide to CSW that JERA undertook on behalf of the Office for Women a few years ago, and that is at csw.jerainternational.org. And there are a number of other resources and links that will be important for you to be able to look at. Also, some of the work you need to be looking at is work that, again, JERA undertook on behalf of eS4W, which was the international to the national, looking at the SDGs. And many of those relate to each CSW, and again, this year, of course. So looking at that, and then that will also take you to a number of other sites that will include other international agencies and meetings that will give you some background information to find language or a point of order that you may be able to use in your negotiations, in your submission, and at CSW. And then, Teresa, you've asked about the Australian government and its the delegation, which includes NGO delegates as well. After the names are put forward, the government will make a decision about who those delegates will be. They will then be asked to sign the various contracts and agreements with the government, giving them instructions on what they can and cannot do in the context of being on the Australian government delegation. They will have a meeting or two prior to going to CSW, but the major time the meetings will occur amongst the Australian government delegation will be during the 2 weeks of CSW. And Carol and I both have been on Australian government delegation, and the way it operates is very similar each year. They will be meeting every morning because they all stay in the same hotel. They will be meeting every morning and regularly. They will also be meeting with the rest of the Australian NGOs. That's one of the roles of the NGO delegate, is to meet up with all the other Australian women who have come along and to tell us an update of where everything is sitting with the government, how it's progressing, and what's being raised that we may be able to support the government with throughout the CSW platform and our networking and our meeting, both inside the UN and outside. And they will also do a report back. There's usually a meeting prior to going to CSW, a pre-departure meeting, that will have those the Australian government delegation and the NGOs will meet up, and probably either by teleconference or a face-to-face, where everyone will meet so that you know who's who, and that will happen just prior to going off to CSW. Then there will be a return meeting after CSW, and that's how we take everything forward from there. And again, you'll have an opportunity to speak to the Australian delegation fully, both the government delegates and the NGOs. I hope that explains it, Teresa.
So just to summarise, Therese, there will the self-funded NGOs who go to CSW tend to interact at CSW through the NGOs who are on the delegation, and there has in the past been daily meetings. We are not. This is especially vital in the second week when they're negotiating language, and we need to find out where we are in the language document. There are also other ways if you're going to be advocating through the women's major groups, which operate also at the Commission on the Status of Women. And really beforehand, we're not quite sure what's going to happen. As I say, I expect the information late because we will not know who's going to CSW and probably until the last minute, because the minister doesn't really let us know until the last minute, and given that there is rumours of an election, there may be other things that need to be taking place there. If there's no more questions, there's no more come up on the board, then we would like to say thank you very much for attending today's webinar. It will be available. I would specifically like to thank Michelle, who came in remotely and has had the technical challenges that a lot of us have had. Isa, who is in the studio with us, Judith, myself, The Asia Pacific NGO Committee on the Status of Women provided the information on the interlinkages between the Beijing Platform for Action, CEDAW, and the SDGs. And of course, Prue Mooney, Director of International Engagement, who will be leading this forward. We'll be hearing from a lot in the next few months. I do encourage you get into the Economic Security for Women website. So you can check the dates, the deadlines, you can download and have a look at the videos again, and you can start to prepare your language. Judith, would you like to finish?
Yes, and again, thank you to everyone who's participated. It's been great. If you have any other questions, please put them forward to Sharon at eS4W, and where possible, we'll be able to deal with them. So this is just the beginning of giving you the information you need. As Carol said, it is vital that you go onto the website, not just to have a look at the webinar again, which may be helpful to you, but more importantly, to check out the resources to find out some of those things that are more generally experience of the conditions under which you may have to look forward to when you come to CSW, such as the cold, etc. But there are other resources that will be there, and I encourage you all to look at those and to ask questions. And for those that you may be coming to CSW, we will look forward to seeing you there and try and help you wherever we can. Take care, everyone, and Merry Christmas.
Okay, I'll just hand you to Isa to say the final note and to give you the address if there are any queries for this particular presentation.
Right. I would just like to reiterate what everyone has said today, and essentially that is we need to take an intersectional approach to all of these issues on a global and national level. And I'd also like to thank eS4W for hosting this. It's quite incredible to have a platform for women to discuss these critical issues. Now, Sharon's email is coordinator@securityforwomen.org.au, 4 being the number 4. Yep.
Okay, thank you everyone, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.